how about we start by giving everybody a chance to tell us what you do and why do you feel excited about tonight's topic? How about we start with Kate?
Thank you, Phoebe, and to the Founder Institute, and to all of you who are here tonight. Welcome. So my name is Kate, and I'm the Partnership and Development Manager at The Social Outfit. And we are a fashion label with a difference. So we started out by wanting to solve a social problem, and that problem was that refugee women face some of the largest barriers to employment here in Australia. So with the view to wanting to solve that problem, we realised that a lot of refugee women were coming with great sewing skills in garment manufacturing, either from a domestic or having worked in the garment industry overseas. And so we thought, what a wonderful opportunity to create a fashion label that creates employment for women arriving from refugee and new migrant backgrounds here in Australia. So all the clothing that we make is here on site in our Newtown store in Sydney. And I think, why I'm particularly passionate about this topic tonight is that, as a social enterprise, I've seen firsthand at how much our customers love being able to shop with purpose. There is a really strong sense of alignment with our mission and values. When our customers come in, they're not just buying clothes, but they're purchasing something that has incredible meaning and value, that's creating real impact in the lives of new migrants here in Australia. And personally, I am very passionate about sustainable fashion, and I have been for many, many years. So I guess I have a personal interest, as someone who, buys a lot of clothing either from thrift shops or secondhand, or I upcycle. Secondhand is a big part of how I consume clothing. I try to make my clothes last as long as I can, and when I do purchase, I don't mind spending a little bit more money for something that was made ethically and sustainably. So that's my little intro. I'll leave it there because I want to give all the other panelists a chance to respond as well, and keen to hear your input.
Sure, thank you so much, Kate. How about you go next, Mark?
Thanks, Phoebe. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Reading. I'm the head of the Atlassian Foundation. I've been at Atlassian for just under 4 years. Prior to that, I spent a very lengthy career at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I spent 33 years at PwC. My last 6 years at PwC, I was the corporate responsibility partner. So that's sort of my background. My professional work at PwC was valuation and strategy work, and in particular working with early stage businesses. Why am I passionate about tonight? Well, firstly and foremostly, it's because my personal purpose in life is to help to bring out the best in business. With a career sort of that's more commercial than social impact, at least prior to the last 10 years. It's not surprising that I see the power of business and the potential good of business. And for me personally, playing my part in helping to bring out the best in business is what drives me. So tonight's all about purpose, and it's a contribution and an opportunity to live my own purpose. A little bit about sort of the Atlassian Foundation and Atlassian. Obviously, everybody know of Atlassian. I'm not sure if everybody would know about Atlassian's social impact history. I'll give you a very quick snapshot. Essentially, when Atlassian was only about 2 or 3 years old, so we're talking about 2004 or 2005, Scott and Mike, 2 co-founders, basically said at that stage, look, if ever we're successful, because at that stage it was an if, we're going to use 1% of our resources for good. And so they pledged to use 1% of Atlassian's equity, profit, people's time and product for good. That public promise that was made basically was the seed that enabled the establishment of the Atlassian Foundation. The Atlassian Foundation is now one of Australia's most well-resourced foundations, fortunately. That 1% of equity has sort of turned into an asset base these days of about 300 million. And everybody at Atlassian gets a week a year of paid volunteering time. And when we had server licenses, the server licenses were available free of charge to any non-profit anywhere in the world. There were about 70,000 licenses, free licenses that had been given. Whereas now we're a cloud company, so we can't give them away free of charge, but we give them away at a 75% discount. And we focus on 2 things through the Atlassian Foundation: educating disadvantaged youth around the world at scale, So aiming to help to educate tens of millions of kids, and there are a number of partnerships we've got to do that, and the Pledge 1% movement, which essentially is encouraging early stage founders to consider pledging, just as Scott and Mike did, to use 1% of all of their resources for good. So clearly there's a spectrum from non-profit at one end through to entirely for-profit at the other, and Pledge 1% is just one of those options that's available if you're fundamentally commercial but want to make social impact into the DNA of your business. And that's probably enough from me.
Thank you. That's beautiful, Mark. And for the audience, if you haven't heard of the Pledge 1%, Mark just mentioned, I highly recommend you to Google it afterwards and check it out. It's a great charity program if your business or the organization you're working for is thinking to look for charity to work with. So next, how about we move to Jeremy?
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you for having me. So I'm the founder of I Equal Change. We've built a technology platform that makes it simple for online retailers to give back. And this has been, in some respects, a 20-year journey. I lived in Havana, in Cuba, when I was in my early 20s, and I saw a lot of violence against women. And I was very disturbed and angry by what I saw, and felt overwhelmed that I had no idea how one person could possibly make a difference to what I now call the ancient issue of our time. And I started meeting with NGOs every chance I had to travel that work to empower women and girls in their communities, and realized that a small amount of money can go a long way, especially in the developing world. And coming from an entrepreneurial family, I thought, how could we somehow unlock the power of business to raise funds for these incredible projects and impact leaders that I'd been meeting? And so that sparked this idea to make it easy for retailers specifically to give back with every sale, and engage their customers in their purpose, and help them build that into the full customer journey as a way that we now have the data, which is actually driving them increased engagement, increased conversions, increased sales, increased loyalty. Ultimately, their brands are getting an ROI on their giving, which previously has been, I think, almost impossible to measure, because a donation has been seen as a cost, and we've been working really hard to prove that it's actually one of the best marketing spends a business can make. So we seem to have built something unique globally at the moment. We're growing quickly, even in this time, as retailers want to increasingly build purpose into the DNA of who they are, especially now, which is really interesting. We can talk more about that. But yeah, it's exciting to sort of see the evolution of this space over several years, and to be here with everyone on the panel and kind of sharing what seems to be the one of, if not the fastest growing movements in business at the moment.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And now can we have Andrew, lucky last?
Sure, thanks, Phoebe. So yeah, I'm the CEO of an organisation called Lab Australia and New Zealand. We are the regional part of the global network of organisations, B Labs all around the world. We look after the B Corporation movement and community. So B Corporations are for-profit businesses that have been certified to meet the highest standards of environmental and social performance, and have made legal commitments to effectively balance purpose and profit. The original certification model came out of the US, but it's now a global movement. There's about 3,500 B Corporations around the world. We've got just under 300 in our local region. And so as a certification, what we do is we effectively independently verify the performance of a business across a wide range of criteria. The simplest way to think of it is that we are to the whole of the business what fair trade is to a coffee bean, in the sense that if you purchase fair trade coffee, you know that it's been purchased in a certain way that protects the interests of the farmer. what B Corp certification does is look at all aspects of a business. So it's a holistic, very demanding, very rigorous and very tough to achieve certification. In Australia, we've got businesses like Travel, Beyond Bank and Kathmandu out of New Zealand. And of course, Jeremy with I equals Change. Jeremy's a B Corp. And Kate's also had a long history with different B Corps as well. So some small businesses and well-known businesses globally include businesses like Patagonia or Ben & Jerry's, The Body Shop, and many others. So we really are a movement of businesses that believe very much in the idea of using business as a force for good. And I have the great privilege of looking after the Australia and New Zealand community.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you very much, everybody. I guess it's pretty common, like everybody nearly start to realize that in the past, even though the business focus is usually just solely on creating the biggest kind of the shareholders, but especially over the recent years, we have seen this shift happening. So from the consumer level, the consumers are buying with more conscious. They're more aware of where they're buying from. You know, the companies they are doing business with, are they just simply providing a product service, or are they actually doing good as well? So I guess the first question is, do you think there is actually a trade-off between profit and creating social value at the same time? Or is this something can happen together? Like, is it achievable for business to succeed in both?
I'm happy to jump in just on this one first, because it's an easy answer for me, and the answer is no, it's not a trade-off. Increasingly, in fact, there's a great article recently from McKinsey's where they talked about the idea of purpose being a business's superpower, in the way that purpose really articulates to not only customers, but to all stakeholders in your business. So investors, your staff, your suppliers, and most definitely your customers. Having a clearly articulated purpose that is bigger than just generation of profit really gives people a reason to support you and to get behind you as a business. And that translates into, I think, increasingly clear benefits around customer loyalty, sales growth, and even these days, risk mitigation. We're seeing businesses that tackle climate risk are actually getting better long-term returns because they've got a better risk profile. So to me, the idea of sort of you make your money over here and then you donate your money over there is less of the traditional way to look at it. And I think even when you take ideas, like Mark expressed, the idea of 1% for the planet, it's or 1% of your resource, which is even bigger than that. It's not about saying, well, we're just going to make a bit of money and then hopefully donate some. It's putting that in the core of your business, articulating that our business is here to solve some problems, not just to make money for our owners. And I think it's a really powerful way to drive growth.
I'm happy to add a few comments there. I totally agree with Andrew. I actually think that those businesses that combine both commercial and social goals, really deeply embed purpose into the core DNA of the business, are those that are actually going to thrive and prosper longer and have less risk over the longer term than those that are just take a more traditional focus upon commercial outcomes, shareholder value. So I actually don't think it's a trade-off at all. I actually think it's setting yourself up for success. Interestingly, I do think it's a lot easier for a new business or an early stage business to embed purpose and social impact into the DNA of the business than it is for a very large, well-established business that hasn't really focused on purpose for most of its history to suddenly pivot and introduce it. But certainly for those that do find a way, whether it's as an early stage business or a more mature business, I actually think you're setting yourself up for longer term success.
Yeah, I just add to that. I'd go so far to say that a business that only exists to make money is a dying business model, and it is increasingly irrelevant to consumers, which is all of us, who want to shop with our values and buy from businesses and brands and services that reflect the world that we want to see. And especially now in these urgent times, to not be able to have a bigger conversation beyond your product. I mean, we're seeing brands in this time suddenly become very quiet on social media because they don't know what to say. You know, influencers and the next pair of shoes just doesn't matter. It doesn't cut it anymore. And unless you're able to engage your community in an authentic conversation beyond product about what you're committed to creating and the journey you're on as a business, you're less and less relevant. And I think brands are really struggling to have a voice in this time when they realize that they need to engage in this. They don't know where to start often. And that's a big challenge for a lot of the business community. And I think we're sort of in the early stages of a sort of growing majority of businesses realize that they must be very proactive. This is not a nice to have, it's becoming a must have. And if businesses want to thrive in this century, especially in this time, this must become a non-negotiable part of who they are.
If I can just sprinkle some salt in, so to speak, I guess. I don't personally, I think hand in hand, profit and purpose do live together. And I guess working in a business that was designed to solve a social problem with a business solution, of course, I believe that. However, coming from the fashion industry and knowing that there might be other industries out there, with those who are listening who are in an industry, when you look at those who've been set up purely to make money. For example, in the fashion industry, those who are doing offshore manufacturing in garment factories that are designed to create the highest amount of profit and are maybe not paying their workers or using slave labor or forced labor. When it comes to the fashion industry, manufacturing here in Australia, there are increased costs. So I guess it comes down to how you measure your value and that it's not just about financial value, that for us to manufacture clothing, there is actually a trade-off, in terms of wanting to create social value and social impact. There are inefficiencies involved in our business. And I say inefficiencies in a very gentle way, in that we're working with people who maybe have a very basic skill level. And as part of our business, we've decided to upskill them in order to create a job for them so that we can solve a social problem. And I don't believe creating jobs and providing support to those who face barriers to employment is solely the responsible of nonprofits and governments. There is a responsibility for business to be involved in trying to figure out those problems as well. So from a purely cost point of view, you may find that setting up your purpose-driven business is more expensive than one that is just designed to maximize profit. And I guess that's what sort of Mark was getting at by saying, if you start out by wanting to address a social issue from the beginning, it's much easier to build your business around that, rather than kind of being set up to make money and then kind of backpedaling and going, right, well, actually, if we want to do this ethically and sustainably, it's going to cost us more. But I guess it's a matter of how you measure value, and that there is kind of real value in the social impact. And I'm keen to hear a bit more maybe from Andrew about how we do measure impact, because I know that's something you're involved in as well.
Sure, thank you, Kate. And in fact, there's a question I have on my list already for Andrew to answer towards the end. But before we move on, is there any other addition anyone wants to make on this topic? Anybody doesn't think that? Yeah.
I see that Tess has asked a question in the chat. I don't know whether or not you're keeping an eye on the chat, but whether we want to.
Oh yes, I'm looking at it. Yeah, so since Mark has mentioned it, how about we just answer this question from what audience has, Jeffa? How do we instill purpose into the core of our business? Or in her case, it's her startup.
I'm happy to respond. Tess, I'm assuming you're a founder. I'm hoping you're a founder because at the end of the day, if it is founder-led, it has got a far greater chance of actually truly being embedded and thriving within the business. My advice to any founder would be think about what it is you're actually trying to achieve through setting up a business. and then think about the different models that could work to help you achieve that goal. And there's a huge spectrum of models, as I sort of alluded to earlier, from a non-profit at one end through to a for-profit that doesn't give a shit about anything other than money at the other end, and a whole range of options in between. You know, B Corps, social enterprises that allocate all of that are for-profits but allocate all of their profit towards the social cause. Social enterprises that are for-purpose businesses that allocate a percentage of their profits, like Who Gives a Crap, for example, that applies 50% of its profits to social issues, through to businesses that are primarily commercial but want to bake purpose in, so through the Pledge 1% movement, for example. Think about all of the different structural options that exist and work out which one works best for you and your motivation and your goals, and then as the founder, steadfastly champion that particular cause and that particular approach from the very beginning. I mean, we're very lucky at Atlassian that Scott and Mike's decision to bake social impact into the DNA of Atlassian was a decision taken in the really early days from a very authentic place. They did it purely to have social impact, but it's actually probably generated more business benefits than they could ever possibly have imagined. The one thing that I would caution any founder against would be doing it in order to enhance the brand. We've all got really strong bullshit detectors, and if you're doing it for authentic reasons, people tend to pick up on it, and I think you're respected and supported for doing so. If you're doing it primarily for the benefit of the business's brand and the benefit of shareholders, then the cynic in most of us, I think, detects that, and you probably actually do more harm than good. So do it from an authentic place or don't do it at all, would be my comment.
Yeah, and just to add to that, thanks, that I think it is about the product or the service embodying that story and that purpose in a way that if you imagine someone engaging with your service or holding your product, using your product, if there's a way in which that product can embody that purpose, and that it must come from an authentic place, a problem you personally want to solve, so that you need to be able to believe in it, because you as the founder, if you truly believe in wanting to solve this social problem, and are really committed to it, or social, environmental, or whatever it is, that belief is what is going to carry you through, because times will get tough in business. And if you go back to always having that belief, and a product that embodies, or service that embodies the story, you'll be in a really good place.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I would just add that try not to be, because you can't, everything to everyone. And do that one thing that, as Kate's saying, that you're passionate about, that is deeply authentic to what you care about in the world. And you won't tick every box and make everyone happy. But, we partner with a lot of fashion brands, and people say to us, oh, well, how do you know their supply chains are not pristine? I'm like, no one's supply chain is pristine. I mean, even Patagonia talks about minimizing harm. But through us, they're able to give back $1 with every sale, and we've raised over $2 million with that and impacted the lives of over 536,000 people, and it adds up. And it's based on people being passionate about taking their business on the journey to creating the greatest impact that they can. A lot of businesses partner with us, and then they say, what else can we do? Because they realize they get a great response from the customers. And I say, talk to Andrew, become a B Corp. And now you can build that into who you are in a more comprehensive way. And so there is no silver bullet. For a brand in the early stage, I would simply, if I'm adding anything of sort of unique value, just start. Don't worry about getting it perfect, but just to commit to creating that impact around the social issue that makes you crazy, that wakes you up in the middle of the night, that you feel a deep injustice towards. And generally those social issues need money. And if your business can be successful and create new funding to support that issue that you care about, you're already doing more than most people on the planet. And so that is, don't try to be everything, just start. And then from there, you can look at all areas of your business and make them as sustainable and ethical as possible.
Yeah, I think as well, on that point, a good way to test yourself is your goal well articulated, and if you've got a strategy statement, they do matter. And if it says we're going to be the biggest or the best, or we're going to have a growth rate of X times, ask yourself, why does that matter? What is the benefit of you being the biggest or the best, or having a certain growth rate? And in the startup world, it's often driven by investors that put those metrics on you, but you need to clearly understand why that matters. And a good example of that is there's a fantastic business in the Adelaide Hills called Unico Zello. They're a B Corp, and they're a wine and spirits producer. They produce wine and the fabulous Applewood gin. And when they first started off, they had a real passion around changing the way grapes were farmed. They had a real focus on regenerative and sustainable agriculture, but they didn't own any land. And when they went to grape growers and asked them to purchase grapes that were grown in a certain way, they discovered that they were only asking to buy half a ton of grapes off a farmer that might produce 50 tons, and they were being told, well, we can't change the way we farm for you. So that gave them a pretty clear message. They needed to get big enough to actually influence farmers to start solving the problem they wanted to solve. So they recognised they had to grow, they had to get to scale in order to influence farmers. And cut a long story short, they now have these incredible relationships with farmers in the Adelaide Hills where they've been able to change the way these farmers operate for the better. So I think a good test is if, as you're confronting new challenges in your startup and you're having to make decisions, your purpose or your problem that you're seeking to solve is your North Star to help make those decisions. And if that problem is kind of stranded in a strategy plan and never seen of again, then I think you're going to have an authenticity problem. So a good way is to really test your decisions. Are your decisions being made thinking about that purpose?
And I also have a very short word for test as well. I think it's always good if you can come back to yourself and ask, why are you starting this business? Because the greatest companies and the greatest founders out there, they are all driven by this great passion within. So the passion you hold within yourself when you are running your business will give you the guidance and all the insights you need to find that purpose and to find how you're going to relay your message to your audience. How can you communicate your product and service to your customers? So I'd like to take a pause here and let's move on to our next question. So since it's so good to have this focus on creating more social value, environmental value as well, while making a good profit, then why aren't enough businesses are doing it? Is it because they are just simply still focused on the short-term financial value, or is there something else that's stopping them?
There are many things, I think, that influence people in business to accept a paradigm of driving financial returns. I mean, you've only got to see when corporate leaders start voicing opinions on issues perhaps outside their business. There's a cohort of people who shout them down and say the role of business is to employ people and make money, and you're not entitled to have opinions. When those same leaders make comments about issues that do get attention, and the day they release their latest results on the stock market, the only conversation in the media is about their financial returns. I think that the idea of consuming consciously is whilst becoming more mainstream, it's still very much got scope for growth. So most people don't take enough interest in the products that they're buying. I mean, there's so many influences on business. It's easy to think that what is undoubtedly a very prominent conversation around purpose is fundamentally changing the way we're operating, but we've got a long way to go, and there's a lot of other influences on people in business that take us away from that goal.
Thank you, Andrew.
I think one of the other traditional obstacles, and it's certainly a significant obstacle for large businesses, is the fact that the corporations law imposes on directors a responsibility to act in the best interests of the company. And at law, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a bush lawyer. At law, the company is the shareholders of the company. And so in these days of class actions, if you're a director of a publicly listed company, you're feeling incredibly vulnerable if you start to make trade-offs that benefit, you know, other stakeholder groups at the expense of your shareholders. You know, suddenly you've got the potential of a class action, emerging. You've also got all sorts of hedge funds and private equity funds, not so much private equity funds, but hedge funds and the like, who are, just looking for an opportunity to sort of attack an organisation or attack the board of an organisation where the directors are not seen to be, maximising the returns that are available from the assets. Personally, I would love to see change in the corporations law in Australia and frankly in every country, because it's pretty similar in every country, that basically said, as a director, you have a responsibility to your shareholders, but not at the expense of other nominated groups, the environment, your employees, the communities in which you operate, things like that. If the corporations law actually said you can't behave in a way that is at the expense of these other groups, we would be in such a better place. But for me, that is actually still a fairly significant impediment. Not so much for an early stage business, but for a company that's got public money invested. I believe it's a real issue.
Mark, I've got to jump back in there because it's an issue that we're very close to, and I won't go too deep on it because we could go all night on this. It's a fascinating question. I mean, Milton Friedman wrote his piece about the role of businesses to drive shareholder value not that long ago at all, and it's become the dominant cultural paradigm, but it's not enshrined in corporate law in a black letter law fashion in many countries. The bigger challenge is that it's certainly enshrined in practice. And I think we have an interesting opportunity, and it's a deeper conversation to have. But in Australia, you can put whatever you want in your company constitution. You can express your purpose to be what you want it to be. How you bring that to life would be as much of a driver of the likelihood of you getting into legal trouble as what the Corporations Act says. I think that you're right to identify the common understanding is the impediment. But I do think that there is scope within the evolving directors' duties in Australia, and there's early signs. There's lawsuits being brought against companies for failing to take into account climate risk. I mean, that's kind of the inverse of what you're talking about. So I think we have an opportunity to evolve those directors' duties, and the beauty of the way they're expressed is they are quite general. In the US, there's much more specific law that says you have to preference shareholders in certain situations. In Australia, we have a bit more flexibility, and that there's clearly an evolution in the way those big companies behave. You saw that most recently when Rio Tinto did some extraordinary harm to some very old cultural artifacts in a mine. Now, they had every legal approval they needed to do that, is my understanding. But when the consequences came in terms of a really strong response, they've accepted that it was probably not the right thing to do, notwithstanding they had the legal documents in place, and they're exploring how they better could have made that decision. I think that kind of evolution of decision making is really encouraging, but first to agree, we've got a way to go.
Anybody else want to make a comment? Yes, sure.
Just to add briefly, just from, I guess, what we've learned is, perhaps the Rio Tinto is a good example where if you don't have that social license to operate, that's perhaps the most valuable thing you have as a commodity. And we work with a lot of retailers who traditionally have done nothing in this space. Some have, but it's been unclear, it's 1% of profits, or they say we support, which, no one really knows what that means. And yet what we're finding is that perhaps beyond the legal ramifications, the greatest driver of growth are the demands of your customers and the shifting expectations of customers. And we're seeing businesses, both large and small, tell us that they've always wanted to do something in this space. It hasn't been a priority until now that they realise that they must. And so for businesses that are thinking about this as a key part of who they are, it definitely provides a very meaningful advantage in this time, because still, as Andrew was saying, most businesses this is not part of their conversation. It's not part of the narrative. And so, as customers increasingly, and who knows what's going to unfold over the next year or two with COVID, right, and the implications for the economy. And what we're seeing is one of the most meaningful ways to stand out is, and this just goes back briefly to the value that a business can receive by authentically building this purpose into who they are. They can have a much deeper and broad conversation with their customers and their staff about their impact. And there's perhaps no more meaningful way to stand out, especially in a time like this, because at the end of the day, products don't vary that much. And as great as ones may be, we all want to be engaged in an authentic conversation with the brand. And so it's, I think it's a very interesting time, but beyond the legal ramifications, how customers are demanding this now more than ever.
Thank you so much. So I just wonder, are there any particular business models that work really well in achieving both financial and social value? Are there any good examples you guys have come across in the past? Perhaps you're using now in your business.
Sounds like something that you're doing, Kate.
Apologies. So I guess, in the social outfit choosing to set out to create employment opportunities, we realised that there was an upskilling and education and training component to what we do as well. So I guess part of what we're doing is really taking people on a journey. So there's a pathway that's been built in to provide training and education opportunities, and we actually partner a lot. I strongly recommend collaborating across sector or with other businesses to support you to achieve your outcomes, your goals, particularly if it's not an area of strength that you necessarily want to master yourself. And collaboration's really been built into our model to support us to move our kind of women through this process to the point where they're upskilled and we create jobs, and through that process we have women for between 6 months to 2 years, and then we transition them to open employment. So there's kind of an exit pathway there as well. So that's more about, I guess, kind of the impact model and our approach to social enterprise employment. And in terms of the business, obviously we do B2C, we sell clothing to customers in a shop and online, but we're also exploring B2B business and being open to what third-party manufacturing looks like. It's not something that we set out to do, but based on the inquiries that we've had and the interest from the social procurement space in working with corporate and government, there seems to be a lot of interest in creating experiences and creating products that tell a beautiful story. So just an example, we worked with a construction company who came to us and said, you do these beautiful prints that go on clothes. We run art workshops with young refugees and make beautiful artworks that get printed on silk and made into clothes, and they wanted to put one of these prints on a play centre. So there was an interesting avenue there to see, well, if we're doing digital prints, what other surfaces could we print on? So I guess that really came out of not an intention that we had, but an inquiry that came in, and now we're thinking, well, how do we actually turn this into a product, and something that we can put up on our website? If we get more inquiries, we can point people towards that, and how we sort of formalize that third-party manufacturing or third-party social procurement as an actual product now.
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. I'm just wondering if there is any particular great business models out there that can achieve both financial value and social value at the same time. Or perhaps it's the one you're using now, Jeremy, for your business.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been very focused on that because we realized that in order to really scale our impact, we had to prove the business return, the ROI on brands giving back. So we have been using a lot of data and analytics and diving deep and working with retailers to achieve those case studies. And just to share some data with you, which is really interesting, is so basically our model is brands commit $1 with every online transaction. The customer gets to choose where it goes to one of 3 projects, and then they can track the impact in real time to see with 100% transparency the impact of their donation. And then we help brands build the messaging that they're giving across their acquisition campaigns and the funnel, which is the site itself, and their post-purchase communications. And we've been seeing, it's really interesting because we knew we had to unlock that and prove that ROI. So we've had some brands who are, you know, those EDMs, those newsletters everyone gets to buy now. We're working with our brands who are featuring both product and purpose, and we're seeing brands receive up to a 66% increase on conversions to sale over just product-only EDMs, proving that customers really care and will engage and shop once they're reminded that the brand gives back. We have brands who are featuring their giving on their Facebook ads and driving up to a 3.5 time return on that ad spend compared to only product-only ads. There's several examples we have which is showing that it's actually unlocking revenue for them in a way that they weren't. A big issue for I mean, I could just speak briefly about retail. Australia has one of the highest rates of abandoned cart in the world, which means we all love to put things in our cart and we don't buy it. We're very aspirational shoppers, it would seem. And we're seeing that when customers are reminded that the brand gives back, it increases engagement and it reduces abandoned cart. And and brands are discounting less and doubling their impact instead. So it's another way it's driving them revenue. So it's been really interesting. We've learned a lot from our retail community about how they're using their messages. And we can confidently say now that they can both give away money, i.e. a donation, i.e. what was always considered a cost. And this is unlocking for them new revenue and driving upwards of a 3 to 4 times return on investment. So it's really exciting to have that data. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the retail space.
Fantastic. Andrew, I saw you just unmuted. Is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I just think you've got such interesting examples here where with Kate and Jeremy, you've got businesses that have been designed around a very specific set of problems. And in Mark, the Atlassian Foundation is one of the biggest in the country to my knowledge. And whilst Atlassian may look like a more traditional software business, albeit a very successful one, there's a huge amount that Atlassian does, not just in the foundation, but in its own operations and in its activities, where what might look like a traditional business model can still have enormous impact. So I would actually sort of answer the question by saying, I don't think there is necessarily a particular business model that's better than any other. I think that there is a distinction between designing a business model perhaps around a very specific social problem, but you can still take a normal business, for lack of a better phrase, and have incredible impact in the way you choose to run it. And I think the foundation is a great example of it, where what might have been a relatively inconsequential decision some time ago has translated to an enormous financial contribution. And that's one way to measure impact in of itself. So I'm not sure that there's a right business model in answer to that question.
I would agree with that. There is definitely no one right model. There are many, many different ways that can work. And it's really just a case of working out what you believe is best for you and your business as a founder. If the core business itself is tackling a really worthwhile issue, solving an important problem, then you've got the foundations for success, irrespective of how you structure yourself or set yourself up. So that I would actually say, the more that you can be involved in creating a business that is of itself a really worthy initiative, that is doing something that's great for humanity, that's the foundation upon which everything else ideally would be built. But beyond that, irrespective of what the core business is, there are many, many different models, and it's horses for courses.
Thank you so much. And for our audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, please make sure to use the Q&A button or the chat function to put your question in there. We'll make sure to address as many questions as possible towards the end of the panel discussion. So back to our panel. In my research, when I was preparing this topic, I came across a very interesting term, and it's called greenwashing. So apparently it is a specific term that's used for businesses to say they are making a social and environmental impact, but actually they're not doing it. So it's just empty talks. So I guess when it comes to the measurement of impact, it has a tremendous effect about how we can make sure this business is actually delivering what they are doing. So what are some of the great measuring techniques and maybe tools out there for sustainability founders to use to measure the impacts they are making? So I guess, Andrew, you will be the expert on this topic. Would you like to start first?
Well, actually, I'm not sure I want to be the expert on this topic, but I think that it would be remiss of me to miss the opportunity to, of course, say, become a B Corp. And I think that to a certain extent, B Corp certification is many things, and one of them is a bit of an antidote to greenwashing, because effectively greenwashing, something like a B Corp certification trust mark, is a way to say, hey, it's not just what we're saying, we've been independently verified to meet these commitments. So I think for anybody that's suspicious of greenwashing, I'd encourage you to look at that business's credentials and find ways to verify what they do. But I think increasingly, someone referred earlier to a bullshit detector. I think that it's reasonably easy to see through greenwashing claims, because the companies that are doing it well, I don't mean greenwashing well, I mean managing impact well, are being transparent. And I think the transparency is the most important thing. So in running a business, don't be afraid to commit to goals that you can't necessarily achieve, and then be open plan about how you're going to get there. And you'll find that people come to the party to help you get there. So for me, if a company's not being transparent, that's another good indicator that they're possibly greenwashing. I think just to answer the point about measuring impact, B Corp certification has a score attached to it, and you have to achieve a certain performance mark to become a B Corp, and it's very challenging. But that score is based on a whole lot of measures across the business, and in of itself, it does not measure the impact of your business. What your B Corp score does is assess how well you perform against the standards that we test you on. Now, it's probably beyond the scope of this conversation to unpack that. But I think if you're coming from the perspective of someone starting a business, the better way to measure impact is to get really close to the impact you want to have and identify how it should be measured. Now, Jeremy, you talked earlier about the number of lives that your business has impacted, as well as the number of dollars that have been raised to go directly to solve those problems. That's a really strong and clear measure of impact. I think that the problem that you're associating yourself with, so connecting with NGOs or third parties who are solving it, see how they define the problem and the solution and adopt their measures for impact. I think, again, when you see a business coming up with sort of fairly complicated claims around impact, that's when you should perhaps be asking some tough questions of what they're actually trying to solve. So I'm sorry to answer the question this way, but I think impact measurement needs to be focused very much on the problem that you're solving, and can be very simple. In fact, sometimes the simpler, the better.
And I'll just add to that, that I think start measuring from the beginning is really important. Decide on what you want to measure and what success looks like. You know, for example, if it's reducing waste in a certain industry, can you start tracking how much waste you're reducing each year and start tracking it and start counting? I mean, from our point of view at the Social Outfit, we do track all of our employment numbers, transition numbers, people who've come through our training programs. So we communicate in terms of the number of people whose lives we impact. We also collect stories. So we have independent evaluators doing interviews so that we can gather the stories and have, you know, so then those stories are able to be told to our customers and to our audiences as a way of communicating that impact, you know, from an emotional place, not just numbers on a page. Yeah, we don't do anything much more sophisticated than that at the Social Outfit, but there are many more sophisticated impact measurement tools out there as well. We also use third-party certification, so we're certified with Ethical Clothing Australia and Social Traders. We're not a B Corporation. The only reason for that, Andrew, is because we're actually a non-profit as well. So we're a non-profit social enterprise, which allows us to access philanthropy in addition to earned revenue from sales. But we certainly would be if we were a solely for-profit enterprise. So having that third-party accreditation or something that you can point to externally, whether it's fair trade or, you know, whatever is relevant in your industry, I think is really important as well. Gives you credibility to your claims about your impact.
The only thing I'd like to, I guess, reinforce is the importance of not just measuring, but doing absolutely everything you can to be looking at the impact that you're having through the lens of the people that you're trying to help. You know, a learning that we've had over the last few years, that we set the goal in the Atlassian Foundation of helping to educate 10 million disadvantaged youth in 10 years. We're moving away from that. It's a really worthy goal, and it's driven a lot of our decision making around the partnerships that we establish, and, you know, we're doing lots of different things. But what we found was that it's too focused upon us. You know, we help to educate 10 million disadvantaged youth. Well, we're basically saying now, look, you know, we've got many different partnerships with all sorts of different organisations, changing lives in many different ways. There's no one size fits all way in which we're having impact, and to try and crudely convert it into a number of lives just isn't really the right thing to do. You know, we're working with the Raspberry Pi Foundation to translate all of their Code Club content, which is currently in English, into about 30 or 40 different languages, so that their operations, which are basically, you know, teaching STEM skills to kids who could otherwise not access them, can be taken out of English language environments into Latin America and into Asia and into Africa and things like that. How do you sort of try and just turn something like that into a quantification of a number? So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard. There is no silver bullet. There's no right way. The only advice I would give is try and do everything you can to be identifying the impact you're wanting to have, and then looking through the lens of the people who you're trying to help, and you know, measure what you can. But you know, there is an old saying, I'm not sure who said it, so it certainly wasn't me who thought of it, but it was not all that can be measured matters, and not all that matters can be measured. And you know, don't lose sight of that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the insights, everyone. Jeremy, do you have anything to add? I just saw you unmuted yourself.
Oh, look, I think it's a really complex question, and I think everyone's touched on some really key points around the complexity. I mean, I would recommend everyone reads the Manifesto for a Moral Revolution by Jacqueline Novogratz, who is the founder of the Acumen Fund. The book just came out, and she talks about, which Andrew, you alluded to, just getting really close to the issue which you hope to have some impact on, with the grace and humility to realize that you probably know nothing about it. And in doing so, working through or at least attempting to look at an issue through the eyes of a local community who have been probably dealing with that issue for hundreds of years, if not longer, begin to learn about the complexity of that issue which you hope to impact. Because we all bring our unconscious bias, and for most of us, different levels of privilege. And, you know, at least up until COVID, I've tried to get to kind of quote unquote the field to, I was just in Bangladesh a few months ago, visiting one of our partners who works to end the marriage of girls. And, you know, I thought I knew 1%. I realized I knew a lot less than 1% by the time I came home around the complexity of, you know, the belief systems and communities. And so how do you measure impact? Firstly, as has been said, work out, you know, what the hell you want to create in terms of impact. It's going to be hard. And then find those people who have been working on that issue, the locals who have been working on that issue for a long time, and then back them. Don't try and reinvent the wheel, create your own NGO, invest in local leaders. And if you impact 1 life, 10 lives, 20 lives, you know, that's impact. That's a life changed. And Mark, to your point, I totally agree. I mean, it's very easy to banter around, you know, hundreds of thousands of lives changed. What does that mean? So the closer you can get as an entrepreneur to the people who you're hoping to have some positive change on, the more you can tell an authentic story, the more it'll impact and touch you as an individual, the more that will be imbued authentically into your business, and the more it's going to be believable, and that passion is going to burn you and give you the fuel, Kate, as you were saying earlier, when business gets hard, as every business does, to keep working to create the change that you want to see.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Now let's have a look at some of the very interesting questions our audience have posted. So this one is about actually communication about our branding. The question is, measuring impact is important, but how do we communicate that to potential customers for market advantage? Would you like to go first, Kate?
Thank you, Phoebe, and thank you for the question, whoever answered that. I think it's a really important one. How do we communicate our impact? I think, as Mark was mentioning, it's important to understand or have a sense of what your customer is going to be moved by and what they'll be most interested in. So, you know, sending out a 5-page report via EDM is probably not the way to communicate your impact if you're, you know, in the fashion industry like I am. So, for example, it might be putting a picture of a top up and saying, you know, X amount of fabric has been saved from landfill through the creation of our clothes this year, because we know that the customer is sustainability kind of and focused on the environment. Or if there's a customer or a group or maybe a corporate who's particularly interested in working with us and they're interested in the employment of refugees, we might say, you know, these clothing collections created X amount of dollars of employment that has gone directly into the pockets of women from refugee communities. So finding out what your audience or your customer is most interested in hearing and making it very simple and clear to the point with some visual indicators that show the impact. And you know, Who Gives a Crap does it really well, and Thank You Water does it very well, where you kind of look at the product and you instantly think of, oh, well, this purchase has enabled X amount of toilets to be built, you know, in the case of Who Gives a Crap. So yeah, clear and simple as possible.
Thank you so much, Kate. Anyone wants to add anything more?
I was just going to say I answered a couple of questions in the Q&A, but they seem to have then shifted them to the answered column. So apologies to the other panelists if I shifted them there. But Phoebe, there's a couple of questions you might want to bring up there as well. I was just trying to add some notes to them.
Sure, I saw those too. Thank you.
Just one thing I would add, and it's to a degree sort of reinforcing Jeremy's earlier point about humility. I think the more that you can approach issues with humility and a learning mindset, and the more that you can be humble in the way that you talk about what you do, the better. If you start, I'm not sure what the opposite of humility is, hubris or something, I guess, I don't know. If you start demonstrating hubris or self-serving claims, I think not only is that just poor practice, it's actually going to harm your business as well. The more that you can be authentic, the more that you can be humble, the more that you understate your impact rather than overstate it, the more you're likely to be seen to be acting from a place of real intent and authenticity. And actually, surprisingly, the more your business will benefit. Unless you've absolutely, like Kate, baked social impact into the very core of your business, I think you're better off erring on the side of humility. And even in Kate's case, I'd say you're probably better off erring on the side of humility. People want to support people they admire. And we tend to admire those who are humble rather than those who are braggarts.
And I will also add to that, I completely agree about humility, Mark, that, maybe it's not making really grandiose claims that reflect large impact numbers, but just telling really simple or sharing really simple stories directly in the words of those who have benefited. That way they are in control of the story that is shared, whether it's one of your beneficiaries or some, I think when you allow people to speak in their own words, those individual stories come together to tell a collective story. So it's not the brand speaking, but it's, the beneficiary speaking.
We have another question from the audience here. When is the right time in your career to begin working on a full purpose venture? I'd like to think anytime. When you feel the passion of, like making money or pay the bill is no longer your only focus in life, when you feel like you really want to give back more to the community you're living in, I would say that's the best time to just follow the calling of your heart, to either start your own or work for a business that can help you to realize that value.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it really does depend upon the individual. You've got to work out what's important to yourself as an individual, and there are certain basic needs that you have to satisfy as well. So you as much as we'd potentially all love to go out and work 100% on purpose, if doing that means that you can't afford to even feed yourself or your family, then that's not a very sustainable approach to life. So you need to find a way to work out what's important to you, and then do your best to do the things that are most going to enable you to live a fulfilling and satisfied life with as much purpose as possible built into it. When that is for any individual and what that looks like for any individual, will vary greatly. The only advice I'd offer, based on my own experience, is the earlier in your life you can find that purpose and start to live it, I think the better off and the happier you are. So that'd be the only comment I'd make. But you can't. We all have to be practical as well, and we can't all go off and live in Africa and feed the poor and have no income whatsoever. So you got to get the balance right as well, I would say.
That's so true. Thank you so much, Mark. And we have a very interesting question actually from an offline. Audience want to be, but couldn't make today. His question is, how much value do you think customers currently place on doing a business with purpose-driven organization? Additionally, if they do a purchase of a product or service, do you think by actually having that purpose-driven will make an impression that the product service will be higher priced? So I guess the purpose here is, will that increase the acquisition cost of a customer?
Yeah, I think that you could answer that question with examples that go any which way. I think that there is plenty of studies coming out that are showing people willing to pay a premium for sustainable brands with ethical products. And then there's the old marketing sort of rules of thumb that tell you if all you've got to talk about is price, then you're in trouble. And that as soon as you start to focus on price too much, then you've really run out of other things to talk about. So I struggle to answer that from a sort of principles basis. I think that the reality is, yes, good branding and backed up by real evidence, of course, can lead to price premium. And I think that transparency is key to that, and showing people why your product costs more is a great way to justify that price.
That's very true, Andrew. And I guess to this audience, when you're watching this playback later, I really think our society is shifting. So for example, 10 years ago, people wouldn't consider so much of paying a premium for a product service that's reflecting the social value, the environmental value is added to its business. But now people start to realize there's no longer a choice. It's something we have to. So this sustainability issue is something we have to address in our daily life, and being a conscious consumer is no longer a luxury, but more coming towards a something necessary for us to do. One last question here from our audience here, Neil Ferrier. So Neil has a very interesting question. He wonders, is it enough in this current world to start a business just because you love the industry and you want to turn a childhood passion into an income stream? Or is there a higher chance to succeed if you can align your passion with something that will benefit the world? He also felt he's a bit selfish, sometimes wanting to succeed just because he loves the work. So any comments from our panelists on this?
My reaction to it is it's great to see that that you love your work, Neil. And I would say that if you do love your work, there's absolutely no need whatsoever to feel selfish about it. You should feel actually very, very pleased that that's the case. Just because you're passionate about something doesn't mean it's necessarily a good business. So I think you probably need to spend the time to work out whether or not something is a hobby or is a side project that you're doing because you are passionate about it, and not to turn it into a business, but because you believe in what you're doing is important, or whether or not it is actually potentially a good business. So I would encourage you to explore ways of trying to uncover the way that something you're passionate about can become a good business. But you know, my old sort of valuation and strategy background is sort of coming to the fore here. And you know, there are certain core elements that you need in order to have a successful, sustainable business, and they go well beyond just passion. So, you know, think about things. You know, develop a business plan to determine what your sustainable competitive advantage is. You know, look at the finances. Can you provide a product or a service at a cost that will enable you to actually, you know, generate value? If so, then you've potentially got a business. If not, then I think you've got something that you do in your spare time, you know, as an honorary initiative that you get a lot of pleasure and satisfaction from.
I'll just add to that, having met some extraordinary impact leaders around the world, to me, these people have often seemed to be some of the happiest people I've ever met. They're not making a lot of money, but the fire burns within, and they are absolutely committed with their final breath to making the greatest impact they can on the issue their soul has chosen for them to address. And I think we've all met people who have a lot of money and are bloody miserable. So, you know, it seems if you were to weigh the two up, as long as you've got enough to kind of live a decent life. If you are living one of deep purpose, which is a reflection of everything you believe yourself to be, my experience are these are some of the most passionate, inspired, energized people that I've ever been fortunate enough to spend time with.
Yeah, and I just add to what I said earlier. I mean, there are ways that you can organize things so that it doesn't necessarily have to be a business as such. I mean, it can be a non-profit. And the thought that is springing to my mind is something like Humanitics. Probably most people on the VC have heard of Humanitics, but just in case you haven't, fundamentally it's a non-profit ticketing platform that's a direct competitor to Eventbrite. Set up by two of the most inspiring young guys I know, and 100% of any profits it does generate, because it's a non-profit, are used for education of disadvantaged kids around the world. We, the Atlassian Foundation, are very passionate supporters of Josh and Adam, the two founders of Humanitics. We can support them because they are a non-profit. We can fund them because they are a non-profit. We could not fund them if they were a for-profit business. And so, a for-profit model is not necessarily the best way of building something that is really big and scalable and global, which I believe Humanitics ultimately will be. I think it'll become bigger than Eventbrite by some margin over time. And I think Josh and Adam will have a hugely positive impact on the world. But they've chosen to go down the non-profit path rather than the for-profit, for-purpose path. And I think, to their credit, that's going to give them a greater chance of success long-term. So, they are living their purpose. They're doing it in a way that relies upon philanthropic support for the time being. But I highly commend the approach that they're taking, and would encourage anybody who's thinking about living their purpose to be open to all sorts of different structures and models.
I can't agree more. And to Neil, I'd also like to add a bit of comment here. I would really encourage you to channel your passion and really listen to that, because from listening to yourself and really understand your own passion and where that came from will help you to more authentically not just run your own startup, but also to lead your own life as well. Because it is that passion and it is that underlying deep feeling within us that help to guide us along in our lives. And don't really worry too much about what other people feel is ideal, because their ideal will not be your ideal. So really, what's your focus in life? Is it running a non-for-profit organization, just do good, or is it to have a balance of both? And that is the question that you have to really ask yourself for. And to our panelists, I've just actually, I have a final question come through, but I don't think we need to address it anymore. It's actually from Jeff. Jeff's question is, why does for-purpose and for-profit needs to be mutually exclusive? Can they complement each other? And actually, Jeff, I think you might be a bit late to join this discussion. This question we actually addressed at the very, very beginning. So the answer to your question is, actually, I want to emphasize once again to all of our audience here, there's more and more studies and research have been done that businesses addressing for environmental value and social value are actually more likely to do better in generating profit as well. So if you guys are interested, please just go on Google and search for some of this research done by the universities and consulting firms. So I think that wraps up our panel discussion today. And I'd like to say a very, very warm thank you to our beautiful panelists tonight, Mark Reading, Andrew Davis, Kate Claxton, and Jeremy Mauser. Thank you so much for joining us and for all your insights. And I will be staying on for a bit longer for everybody who's interested in our program at Founder Institute. We run a sustainability accelerator program to help early stage founders to start up their own business and tackling any sustainability related problems. So I will be staying online. And once again, thank you to all of our panelists tonight and all of our audience who take the time to tune in to us. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phoebe.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Cheers. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.